So it was reported late Wednesday afternoon that the Bills are signing wide receiver Elijah Moore to a 1-year contract worth up to $5 million. Now, this comes days after Brandon Beane went off on Jeremy White and Jody Biasi on WGR, saying that bitching about wide receivers is one of the dumbest arguments that he's ever heard. So this all started right before 8:30 because Jeremy and Joe were talking to Sal Capaccio, and they were saying, Sal, do you think that Beane undervalues the wide receiver position because he didn't draft one until round 7? Now, a lot of people, myself included, wanted the Bills to draft one in the mid rounds, probably late Friday, early Saturday, assuming that the board fell their way. So that's important to note that, after they trade up for Deion Walker, the names that were available were starting to dry up. But going into the draft, I think a lot of us had hoped for adding that one last piece to the offense. So they were asking Sal and saying, there are teams like Green Bay or Tampa who just throw multiple darts and say, you know what, we're just going to spend multiple second, third, fourth, fifth round picks on these wide receivers and see what sticks. I mean, look what Tampa did. They double dipped and they took Emeka Okbuka in the first round. This year, they also took Tez Johnson in the 6th round. Last year, they took Jalen McMillan in the 3rd round, and they still have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So they are investing in that position because it's a premium position. Well, Beane didn't like that because before Jeremy could even ask his first question, Beane started to go off and said, listen, I heard what you said right before I came on, and I don't understand. What is this, 2018 all over again when you were bitching about me taking Josh Allen over Josh Rosen? And he was just saying, I don't get it because our offense has been so good. We needed to invest in this defense. We needed to build properly through the defense, and that's how I went about it. Now, I agree. Because let's take a look at some of the reasons why Beane would want to build up the defense. So first and foremost, they needed to get younger and cheaper. Chris Brown brought up an interesting nugget the other day on One Bills Live, and he said that he calculated the average age of the Bills defensive linemen after the AFC Championship game and then after the draft. So after the AFC Championship game, when they walked off the field in Kansas City, the average age of that D-line was 28.8 years old. Right now, it is 24.7. So, mission accomplished. Now, a couple of numbers that really show why the Bills needed to do this. Not just because the Eagles dominated the Chiefs in the Super Bowl by only rushing 4 and sacking Mahomes 6 times, but these are some really absurd numbers here. So 33.2 points per game and 426.4 yards per game. That is what the Bills defense is allowing over their last 5 postseason losses. So if you add up all 5 postseason exits, 4 against Kansas City, 1 against Cincinnati, you add them up, divide by 5, that is what you get. So that is just ridiculous that this defense has been allowing more than 30 points per game and over 425 total yards per game. So that definitely needed to end. Now, it's important to note that with those numbers come the injuries as well, because 2020 and 2021, the Bills were really healthy, and that's why it really stings that they couldn't get the job done. But 2022, 2023, and 2024, they were really hampered down the stretch, particularly in January, to the point in 2023 that they literally had to call A.J. Klein out of his RV and say, hey, can you come up here and cover Travis Kelce in the divisional round? He was literally on his way taking his family to a vacation, and then he had to suddenly come out of retirement to play in one of the biggest games of his life. And then you go to 2024 when Christian Benford just recovered from a concussion. He had a history with concussions. They were already thin at corner. And sure enough, Benford sustained a concussion early in the game, and Kyer Elam had to come in and finish. And you knew that the Bills knew that they could not trust him, but they were so thin at the position that they had no other choice. Now, sure, I guess I could have went with Jamarcus Ingram, but a UDFA from UB, first-round pick from Florida, I think the Bills wanted to side with their first-round pick, with that capital and investment, and say, he does have the physical traits. We'd like to think that we can trust him, but sure enough, they could not trust him, and now he's in Dallas. And then branching off those injuries is the annual Jordan Phillips signing in November when the Bills realized after about 10 weeks, we need to beef up our defensive line because we're starting to get run on now that the weather's starting to turn and teams are starting to pick up on this. So let's call Jordan Phillips. Let's call Quentin Jefferson. Let's call Linval Joseph. So that is over. They definitely addressed that by drafting Deion Walker. They traded up for Walker. They traded up for TJ Sanders. They drafted Landon Jackson. And going back to free agency, they signed Joey Bosa. They signed Larry Ogunjobi. They signed Michael Hoyt. So the Bills made it a concerted effort to build up their defense, particularly the defensive line in the draft. And I think that is a very smart decision because the other reason is that this is a premium position. And even corner, right, with that first round selection of Maxwell Harrison, those are the premium positions that you say, hey, we might have to pay $20+ million to get a really good defensive end or a really good corner, even $30 million. So let's draft these guys a cost control contract, and hopefully we will reap the rewards down the road. But that being said, let's take a look at the other side, because as I opened up with, that was the original point that Jeremy White was trying to make, is that the reason you would want to draft a wide receiver in the mid rounds, again, assuming that the board falls your way, is that it would be a cost controlled contract, because the wide receiver position is a premium position, probably the most premium position outside a quarterback. So I think that's all he was trying to say. Now, I know that him and Joe have been the conductors of the wide receiver train, so maybe Beane was tired of the critics. He was tired of listening to all that. And even going back to 2018, he was pulling receipts out from that draft with Josh Rosen. Not to mention, it was a long, stressful week, and he probably didn't sleep much, and he just let it all out Monday morning. But I think there are a lot of valid points to make here, because you don't have to draft one in round one, but it might be good business just to draft at least one every single year, because you might hit on one. Look, you did that with the corner room in 2022 and really did it this year too, but you threw a dart and you hit with Christian Benford, and now he's your corner one. So maybe it would be smart just to do that at least once every year in those mid rounds, again, assuming that the board falls your way, because you don't know if you're going to have a hidden gem in there, so that you don't have to pay $30 million for that top wide receiver. And as I've said before, I was a big fan of finding that vertical deep threat for Josh Allen, because I think that is an added element, an added dimension that this offense needed. And Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane talked about this all throughout the offseason. Ever since the season ended, they said, hey, we want to be able to stretch the field vertically and horizontally. So they were kind of giving you breadcrumbs to say, yeah, we want to add to this position. So that's why I'm not sure why there was so much pushback on WGR the other day, because you knew it could definitely be in the cards. Joe Brady's offense is predicated on having a really good run game, and the Bills have done a great job of building that up. But then you have those space creators, and the Bills have a lot of those great route runners. You know, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, they're crafty. They can get open, but they don't have that top end speed to just burn by you and go down the field. So everything is based upon the line of scrimmage, establishing the line of scrimmage, moving the sticks, getting those first downs, chewing up the clock, right? Taking those big possessions. But sometimes it's good to catch the defense off guard and just have someone with that 4.3 speed and go right down and blow past everyone. Now, that being said, before I get into Elijah Moore, speaking of those wide receivers that I mentioned, what if they get hurt? What if Curtis Samuel can't stay healthy again? What if Khalil Shakir gets nicked up in the slot? What if Keon Coleman has another freak injury? That was another reason why I thought it was important to invest in this position, because last year, the Bills were rolling with Jalen Virgil and Tyrell Shavers. So I know you can't address every single position in the draft the way you want to, when you want to, but these are some of the reasons why I understand it from that side. So then Beane goes on Pat McAfee's show on Tuesday, and they're asking about the phone call. And I understood where he was coming from, because basically he was saying, look, we've been let down by our defense consistently. We haven't been able to come up with the big stops. Our offense has been really good. Number 2 scoring offense. We can consistently put up 30 points. That's not the problem. The problem is the defense. You're right. I agree. But then he lost me, because he said, when Josh Allen is your quarterback, making that big money, you have to make concessions, and you can't be paying every position. In other words, he's saying that he can't be paying $30 million for a wide receiver. So I get that, but when you say that you have to make concessions, that means that you don't have the money to pay these free agents, and instead you should be drafting them. Because his words contradict his actions, because over the last 2 off seasons, he's given Curtis Samuel and Josh Palmer $18 million combined based on average annual value. And then if you throw on Elijah Moore's contract, that's $23 million. So you can't be saying that you're making concessions and then throwing out $23 million when you could have just drafted one, two, maybe even three wide receivers for a fraction of that price. So I tried being as fair and balanced as I could with this because I saw a lot of people taking sides this week and then bashing the other side and saying why their opinion was wrong. And I just don't think that's a healthy way to go about it, because now that the Bills did sign Elijah Moore, you better have that same energy that you had before they signed Elijah Moore. Because I saw a lot of people who were saying, oh, we should have drafted a wide receiver on Saturday. Where's the wide receiver? Beane makes a phone call. Oh, yeah, that's my GM. You really showed up those clowns on WGR. We don't need a wide receiver. And now they're telling you how great of a signing Elijah Moore is. So keep the same energy. I like to stay in the middle. I think this is a very solid signing, and I think he's going to help the Bills offense because he gives them that added element of speed and separation. Now, he's not the ultimate burner. He might not necessarily just take the top off the defense, but looking at his advanced stats here, he's played 47% of his snaps from the slot, 52% from the boundary. So he can line up inside or out. He has that flexibility. He has the athleticism. He had a very good RAS score. His 40 time was a 4.35. Now, granted, that was 4 or 5 years ago. And ultimately, that's what led the Jets to drafting him in the second round in 2021. So if we take a look at the stats here, his best season from a touchdown standpoint came his rookie year in New York when he had 5 touchdowns. His best season from a yardage standpoint was in 2023 when he signed with the Browns, 640 yards to go with 2 touchdowns. And his best year from a reception standpoint was this past season in Cleveland, 61 catches, 538 yards, and a touchdown. So you can see, I mean, his numbers are pretty mediocre. He's done some nice things, but I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. And this is really reminiscent, for me at least, of the Curtis Samuel signing last year. When you see this guy with speed and separation and untapped potential, and you say, well, you know what? He's dealt with the carousel of quarterbacks over his career here. So maybe given the right offense, give him Joe Brady's offense, give him Josh Allen as his quarterback, and he really might pop. So after those eventful 3 days, the Bills have their wide receiver. It looks like the room is pretty much set now as Moore slots in as that wide receiver 5. Let me know what you think, not only of this signing, but of the whole situation that we've dealt with over the last few days here. And make sure you subscribe to my channel and smash that like button.